Hello everybody, I'm Eternal Flame here, and today we are here to talk about death and how death is handled in Jujutsu Kaisen, because this is the manga known as the character death manga, and JJK has free ways and specific ways of handling death. So without further ado, let's get into this video. But I'm actually not alone today, I have a guest. Say hi.
What's up guys, Douglas Pencil here, and here we are, as Eternal Flame said, to talk about death and the three different types of it. So Flame, would you like to cover the three different types so we can hop right into it?
There are three different types of death in Jujutsu Kaisen, which one of the deaths is emotion death. This death is made to tug on your heartstrings, made to make you feel sad, like Nobara. She's dead. Deal with it. Cope. Another type of death is Nanami, as well as Junpei, and those type of emotional deaths like that. The second type of death is power scaling death, where these characters don't really have that many emotions involved into it. You likely aren't going to feel too sad when they die, because they aren't actually developed and they don't exist for the purpose of you feeling sad about it. One such example is Kosimo. Rip my boy. And the final type of death is kind of the mix of the two of them, where they both exist to make you feel sad but also look strong. For example, Gojo. And yeah, we're going to cover each of these characters, how they died, and how people actually feel about them.
Sounds like a plan, sounds like a plan. So, the biggest one that I feel like we need to cover is the one that almost gets very little, but same time, extreme amounts of play, and that is the emotional death. The death that's supposed to make us feel something, the death that's not just supposed to make us feel something, but make the character feel something. So, Flame, if you had to raise a single character in the series that is a consistent victim of emotional death, where it seems like no matter where they go, one way or another, a character that they care about is going to die in front of them for their character development, who would that be?
Man, that just sounds like another character who just walked into a subway and immediately saw their mentor die in front of them, Yuji Itadori. Ain't that right, Yuji?
Unfortunately, it is. Yuji Itadori is the biggest victim of the emotional death. And of course, this is natural. He's our main character. But the thing that happens with Yuji Itadori and his consistent emotional death is that it kind of comes at the cost of these characters that we're all supposed to feel emotion for. Flame's gonna go into this more, but the idea that Nanami and Nobara and Junpei and everybody all falls at the hands of Mahito, typically right in front of Itadori, is meant to just facilitate his character development and how he feels about these characters, while admittedly not necessarily having too much time for the characters individually, and that leads to a lot of their deaths having this thing where a lot of the build-up needs to be done either right before the death or right after, which is an unfortunate effect of how JJK is written up to the point, but still serves the character utility of making Itadori feel sad, and depending on how attached you are to the character, making you feel sad, making it, at least in my opinion, an effective narrative weight. But, Flame, what do you think about that?
I feel in particular this affects Nobara more than this affects Nanami and Junpei, because I'm going to be honest, when I saw Nanami, I immediately thought, yeah, this guy's going to die. No mentor character ends up surviving in an anime other than Kakashi, who somehow managed to still survive up to this point. No mentor character manages to survive. And Junpei, I kind of felt bad about, but I feel like there wasn't enough known about Junpei for us to actually matter that much. It wasn't that much was actually lost about Junpei when he died, in my opinion. However, Nobara, when she died, there was so much that could have been done with her, so much potential that she had, so much emotions and room to grow, but at the same time, that's kind of why I think her death hits so hard, because you can see that potential and ways Nobara's plot can go. It's why Nobara still has copium and people coping, that she has a way that she's going to come back, unlike Nanami and Junpei, because people see that potential that Nobara has to grow, and that's why the death actually hits so heavily. But at the same time, that's both a good thing and a bad thing, in my opinion, because it's a good thing that the death hits so hard, because the potential still exists to grow, that it's like they're a wasted character, but at the same time, and that feeling that they are a wasted character is also an issue, because they feel like a wasted character and there's so much more they could do.
Exactly, and that leads to a overall kind of structural issue with JJK and how it handles the emotional death, because the emotional death typically comes at the cost of those characters and whatever potential that they had. Like Flame said, there is definitely a heavy debate on whether or not Nanami was going to get any more. He seemed already at the peak of his potential, not just according to himself, but also Satoru Gojo himself, meaning that there was very little possibility that he was ever going to grow further. And while Junpei is definitely set up more so in the anime as a possible fourth main character, in the manga it's pretty clear he won't have major roles. But Nobara is the one that seems to come at the drastic cost of infinite potential. And that is the byproduct of the fact that ultimately all of these emotional deaths end up serving one main character. our main character, Yuji Itadori. And by doing that, these characters do complete their narrative roles. Meaning that ultimately, while this sort of death in Jujutsu Kaisen is not just commonplace but also consistently used, I think it does work as an effective narrative tool and even keeps longevity in the series and its discussions, like Flame said, with the consistent and never-ending, overflowing, endless amounts of copium that Nobara's gonna come back. She's gonna be useful for her final finger. Someone's gonna pick up Sukuna's hand off the ground and drag it back to her. Something this, something that, something this. Because of how much potential JJK puts into these characters, especially the ones that are going to go through an emotional death, in order to keep the fandom invested and concentrated and focused on the idea of hope and cope that they could actually come back and actually do more.
100%. So, like, Nobara does also, like, the thing is that I kind of like that there is so much hope and cope around Nobara because that really makes her death hit that much harder. But, like, Nobara's death also has another advantage in my opinion, which is it continues to help set up consequences. It continues to help set up stake because it feels like no matter what, any character can die in Jujutsu Kaisen. That's why you have a lot of people who say that Yuji's not the main character pretty often, because it feels like he can die in his own manga. Not because he's, well, for a long time was considered underpowered in comparison to everybody else until now, but that's beside the point. This ain't power scaling.
Exactly. And that beautiful dichotomy that's set up between anybody can die at the cost of our main character not necessarily feeling the main character is one of the things that I personally think works very, very well about Jujutsu Kaisen. Like Flame said, the stake raise that happens when you decide to remove your female lead less than 100 chapters into your likely multi-100 chapter long manga is impressive. It sort of opened up the door to the idea that anyone can go at any time unexpectedly, irregardless of their potential, irregardless of their narrative weight, and irregardless of what potential impacts they could have in the future. And I think that works really, really well and ends up transitioning into the more utility character deaths. The character deaths that will sort of leave it all behind. The character deaths that have a sort of power scaling connotation into it. So, Flame, do you want to talk about our biggest example, our most famous example, our most waffled example of a power scaling death?
I'm not gonna lie, when you were talking, I couldn't tell if you were gonna talk about Jogo or if you were gonna talk about Mahito or if you were gonna talk about Kosimo. But yeah, Kosimo is the most one for that. But yeah, Kosimo is by far and away the biggest character who exists just to power scale, and like his entire purpose in death is just to show Sukuna is strong. That is the only reason that Kosimo exists within the narrative. His only purpose is to show that Sukuna is strong, because they have Kosimo fight against one of the heavy hitters in a pretty pitched battle, where you could argue either could have won by the end of it, but it's that close. And then you show, hey, this guy hasn't used his curse technique, something Gojo has established to basically be 80% of your potential. So that's kind of crazy. Kosimo might actually be him, which led to the fandom of Kosimo speculating about his power level and what he could potentially do for a year, me included. And then it all led to this massive moment of him using this death type curse technique, all for Sukuna to be able to show, hey, I'm too strong for anyone to handle, including this guy who was the strongest of his era, and bam, now dead, because now I need to show I'm strong, and I am him, even though I just finished battling the strongest of the modern era. Another example of this, Gojo.
Exactly, and that's a big pattern that ends up being set up in JJK. Well, Kosimo is the most famous, of course, with the other mentions of characters like Jogo, other characters like Ryu Ishigori, other characters like Yorozu. The power scaling death is arguably just as important as the utility character and emotional death, considering how important battle is to the world of Jujutsu Kaisen. It is innately a battle manga, and thusly setting up stakes and levels of power and aspects of power is one of the most important things you can do. And JJK, in my opinion, while it does come at the cost of certain characters and character potential, just like the emotional death, the power scaling death is just as fundamental. You see it consistently with different characters, specifically matching up against Sukuna, who usually is the biggest proprietor of the power scaling death from time to time. The most famous one is Kosimo, but like Flame mentioned, Jogo is another character who is set up extremely well in the narrative, with high levels of power, extreme stakes, and capabilities to wipe out a majority of our cast at any moment, a domain expansion, a maximum technique. He's overwhelming, he's unstoppable, he's so powerful, and then he runs into Ryomen Sukuna, who proceeds to walk him halfway across Shibuya, even in the anime where Jogo got 50 times stronger. And once again, it all goes to show the levels of power power and the differences in the levels of power between different characters, which is fundamental to how you write a battle manga. Essentially, I view the way that Gege writes these power scaling deaths as an extreme and high-level extension of the traditional jobbing technique, introducing one character having them beat a previous character to show how powerful the new character is. Meanwhile, in JJK, considering Sukuna's been around since literally Chapter 1, it's been a consistent progression of, let's just show how powerful this Sukuna is, and then this Sukuna is, and then this Sukuna is, and then this Sukuna is. So now the question I have for Flame is, do you think that's an effective writing tool, or do you think Gege should have approached it in a different way and tried to lean more towards the emotional death and not just the power scaling death?
I 100% think this is an effective way, because here's my thing with Sukuna, right? I don't think a lot of people would view Sukuna as powerful if half of these deaths did not happen. If Sukuna never killed Jogo, I don't think anyone would view him as powerful because of the way that Sukuna did kill Jogo, where Jogo didn't even land a single hit on him. Now, this does sacrifice Jogo's ability to be seen as a good combatant, because Sukuna was so effortlessly dodging him, but at the same time, Sukuna also is so strong that he weirdly enough makes Jogo actually look stronger as well, because of the fact that Jogo couldn't land a hit on him, but he also just made such a performance in show, especially in the anime. This is also the case for Kosimo as well, but it's actually kind of the opposite, where Kosimo ends up looking weaker than he actually does. However, their entire purpose is just to make Sukuna look that much stronger and put endless amounts of despair into the people that are fighting against Sukuna. Sure, yeah, we could have been told, for example, Sukuna could rival Gojo. Sukuna was the strongest of his era. Sukuna was the strongest of the Heian era, but if we never got to visualize that strength through seeing people that could actually fight against Sukuna, like Jogo, that had comparison to the actual cast itself, we would never truly be able to actually feel that strength until it comes out of nowhere when the cast actually has to fight against him. Without those fights, without those deaths, the level of buildup that was Sukuna's strength would never have happened, and it wouldn't have felt as impactful because we never would have had as much time with Sukuna as we do now.
And I have to fundamentally agree on Flame with this one, because it comes down to the idea of sacrifice and the idea that every single character has a role in the narrative. And while, of course, there are definitely many times and many different people who had higher hopes in characters like Hashimo Hajime, higher hopes like characters in Jogo, higher hopes like characters such as Yorozu or Ryu Ishigori, I think they all end up serving their narrative purpose well enough because these characters do need to exist. It's the ultimate byproduct of needing to have a really powerful final villain. And what Flame said especially that is super important is that despair. There's a massive reason why every single week, every single Black Flash he lands, every single character he drops and does damage to, we're wondering, how can we beat Sukuna? Sukuna is so overwhelmingly powerful. He's in an entirely different league, and like Flame said, without the abilities and the sacrifices of a Jogo, who did everything to fail to land a single hit against an incomplete Sukuna, like Mahoraga, who in the anime got an extreme extension and all the buildup of the Tenshou technique behind it. Without it struggling to do anything against Sukuna, we wouldn't be able to believe it. Without Ryu Ishigori, the man with the highest cursed energy output in history, showing out and then getting shown out by Ryomen Sukuna, it'd be hard to believe this overwhelming strength. And that overwhelming strength ultimately is necessary for the narrative to feel as it does and for the stakes to be as high as they are. And I think it's really, really important. But, of course, with all that being said, these first two types of death, the emotional death and the power scaling death, are not necessarily mutually exclusive. There is one final type of death that acts in both ways, and I think maximizes death in all its aspects in Jujutsu Kaisen. And I think you may know what it is, but let's ask Flame.
And that death is the mix of both. The death that exists both to feel a lot of emotions, put a lot of emotions in the characters, in the people themselves reading, but also a lot of depth to add more stakes, a lot of depth to add more power level to Sukuna. And that depth only currently belongs to one character that we know of, and that character is Gojo Satoru himself, the man who exists to make Sukuna look as strong as he does, as that is his ultimate narrative role. Well, I mean, of course he does have other narrative roles, which is it relies on his connection to the characters, as well as how they feel about him, but that is his current narrative role, to make Sukuna look that much stronger, because of how much stronger Gojo is in comparison to the rest of the cast. For example, Yuta and Hakari, two of our strongest characters, straight up vomiting because they got punched by him once. And that is just made to show how strong Sukuna is by extension, because Sukuna was able to fight that Gojo while holding back. all because of Gojo did say that Sukuna did hold something back. Now, we don't know what that thing he held back was, but we do know Sukuna held back, which makes him seem even more terrifying and even more overwhelming of a presence.
And all of that works in favor in combination with the emotional investment and the emotional weight that goes behind Satoru Gojo and his ultimately inevitable defeat. One of the biggest things that a lot of the power scaling deaths lack is that necessary buildup. When you look at characters like Kosimo Hajime, they're introduced less than 100 chapters before they end up getting executed. Someone like Ryu Ishigori only exists for about 50 to 60 chapters before he gets executed. Heck, someone as important and as pivotal to Sukuna's overall power scaling, his sorcery skill, his abilities, was introduced about 5 chapters before she got executed. But the difference with Gojo Satoru is we didn't just have 5 chapters. We didn't just have 60 chapters. We didn't just have 100 chapters. We built the entire narrative around this man. We spent years waiting for this man to be freed from a box. Gojo Satoru, as Flame said, is not just a character who's introduced solely to perish. He's a character with countless implications on the world around him, characters in the narrative, is even responsible for our 2 main characters' continued existence, whether it be in the case of the modern narrative Yuji Itadori, his whole execution being staved off because of Satoru Gojo, and or Yuta Okotsu, the original main character of JJK Zero, and having his death staved off because of Satoru Gojo. There is a bunch of emotional weight behind the character for all his connections to Suguru Geto, his connections to Yuta Okotsu, to Yuji Itadori, to Megumi Fushiguro. So much went into this character, so much went behind it, and that all worked in combination with his overwhelming power, the strongest sorcerer of the modern day, the unstoppable, the untouchable, the unreachable, he who wields infinity. All that was laid behind him in order to make his death feel heavy, to make his death feel girthy, to make his death have a proper weight behind it that would drastically affect the entire tone of the series going forward on both levels, from the emotional reactions to our characters in the narrative to the reactions to the fan base outside the narrative, whether they be at glee, if pure glee with all the Sukuna fans, or absolute despair for all the Gojo fans. The impact of Gojo's death is basically heretofore unseen within the JJK manga, because at least in my opinion, and I'm about to ask Flame this, it has the perfect balance of both. All the power scaling, all the weight, all the importance, all the raw buildup to Gojo's power, in combination with all that, in combination with his character, is what made it, at least to me, the most impactful death in universe and outside of universe for JJK. But Flame, what do you have to say on that?
I 100% agree, because Gojo's death had such an impact both inverse and outverse that there are still people coping that he's going to end up coming back. Like, you think Nobara has bad copium? Gojo, in a total of a few months, managed to surpass the several years of Nobara copium that have been built up several times over because of how much people actually miss Gojo, because of how much people want their favorite character, Gojo, to come back. Which I understand, because Gojo is what brought a lot of people into Jujutsu Kaisen, him being as cool as he was. Now, Gojo is not my favorite character, but he is what brought me into Jujutsu Kaisen, which I will admit. But Gojo had ended up having so much effect on the world and was easily one of the most powerful characters in Jujutsu Kaisen. He had so many people coming into the manga to read it just because people heard Gojo got unsealed. People who weren't originally going to read the manga. If you look on the outward world effect, you could see just how many camps actually formed, how many people joined the Jujutsu Kaisen manga, which I guarantee you Gojo's unsealing was what caused it to become so popular and what later on led to having such an impact when he actually died. Down to the point where several people have ended up calling Jujutsu Kaisen bad writing because of Gojo's death, which is something I very heavily disagree with, because of the fact that, in my opinion, this is mainly just out of emotion, and the fact that they are so angry about it kind of just helps to show Gojo's death hits hard, and it's supposed to hit this hard, and that's something I think Gege executed beautifully. Furthermore, you can also see it on the characters' faces, the characters' moments of anger, like Yuji and Yuta, when Yuta is literally gripping on his sword, and how fast they both are moving towards the battlefield. Even though Yuta has to do his task with Kenjaku, you can tell Yuta does want to go fight against Sukuna because he wants to avenge Gojo. You can see the anger that Yuji is fighting with because of everything that Sukuna has done up to this point, and all the emotions from all the characters that are all affected, all the characters who wanted Gojo to win, who are happy to see Gojo again, and now have to deal with that grief, but have to focus on the mission as well in order to honor Gojo. And most of all, the airport scene for Gojo, in my opinion, was one of the best scenes for Gojo because it perfectly closes off his character, which is why I also don't want Gojo to come back, because I don't think Gojo wants to come back, but that's for another day.
And all of that is true to the point. So overall, at least from the analysis that we've laid out here, death in Jujutsu Kaisen is well handled and multifaceted. It is not as simple as character just needs to die because it's a dark series and we need to keep slaying characters. No, in Jujutsu Kaisen there are multiple types of death that serve multiple types of purposes, and the ultimate culmination of one singular character death has had unshakable, unstoppable, and unbelievable ramifications both in the manga and in the real world due to the popularity of said character and the execution of his death. And I ultimately have to agree that death is very, very well handled in JJK. But those are my thoughts.
And now onto my thoughts. I 100% think that death is very well handled in Jujutsu Kaisen, and every single death, at least most of them, I would agree are necessary. There are a few that I don't actually think were necessary. I can't think of them off the top of my head, but I know there's at least one of them that I don't think was actually necessary for Jujutsu Kaisen, which I think was Higuruma, but I'm not 100% sure if Higuruma was necessary, and I need to think more on that one. But I do think a lot of deaths were necessary for Jujutsu Kaisen, and a lot of Jujutsu Kaisen would not hit as hard if it didn't have as many character deaths as it did. If it didn't have as many people die as it did. Because Sukuna wouldn't feel as strong, characters wouldn't feel as strong. For another example, would a lot of people think that Maki is as strong as she is if she didn't exterminate the entire Zenin clan? No one would think that Maki is that strong. If Toji wasn't killed, would people think Gojo is as strong as he is as a teenager? No. There is a lot of death that is necessary in order for Jujutsu Kaisen characters to feel strong, or a lot of death necessary in order to tug on heartstrings and just set up proper narratives that are very, very important. And that's why I believe Jujutsu Kaisen handles death extremely well. But that's what I think. Now tell me what you guys think in the comment section down below. I'm gonna see you all later. Thank you, and remember to check out That Guy with a Pencil, and thank you for showing up, man.
Thank you for having me, man. Have a great day.
Bye.